It's the beginning of a revolution in travel. Across Europe, in palaces on rails. A meeting place for distinguished passengers with special demands. Diplomats use the wagons for negotiations, and more than once, history is written in these cars. The train attracts robbers and madmen. But above all, it links the Occident and the Orient. For many people, it still holds a magical attraction. It was born out of a visionary's idea of connecting Paris to Constantinople. Yet, who was this Belgian who risked it all and invented the Orient Express? For decades, Georges Nagelmackers fights for the project of his life, against politicians, against bankers, and against his family.
This is crazy!
How could this man be that successful and create a network of night trains to serve Europe's major cities right up to the present day? The search for its origins leads to unique vehicles, which evoke the early days of the Orient Express. And it unveils the subtle diplomacy which helped Nagelmackers succeed in overcoming the borders of 19th century Europe. Nagelmackers' life is a passionate European love story, which finds its fulfillment between Paris and Constantinople. For Georges Nagelmackers, October the 4th, 1883 is a crucial day.
Bonsoir, monsieur. Bon voyage.
At the Gare de Strasbourg, today's Gare de l'Est in Paris, the first Orient Express is ready. However, its 24 passengers are skeptical, as 3 months before, 38-year-old Nagelmackers had cancelled the widely announced inaugural departure at the last moment. That's why a lot of people have betted against the success of this journey, and the stakes are high with good reason.
The period around 1870 was the beginning of imperialism, when the European powers all aspired to become regional or even world powers and were increasingly shutting themselves off from each other.
In Nuremberg, in the most extensive railway library of Europe, historian Rainer Mertens is researching the development of the railway.
Railway systems back then were a patchwork. Everywhere there were different safety systems, different clearance gauges, also partially different gauges. All the more amazing that at this very point in time, a Belgian entrepreneur is trying to build a railroad across state lines to the Middle East through all these rival powers.
Bon voyage.
Nagelmackers has invested all his assets in the cars. To Edmond Abou, a journalist and writer invited along for the journey, the idea of this train is plain crazy.
Bienvenue, Monsieur Abou. Welcome to the Orient Express.
Good evening. Which compartment?
Number 3, monsieur. Good evening. Welcome aboard.
Several bank directors are coming along too. They fear for the money they've lent Nagelmackers for his project.
Your Excellency.
The Ottoman ambassador is also present. Yet the most important passenger is still missing. It's the Times French correspondent Henri-Stéphane de Blowitz. His article will be decisive for the success of the company.
Attendez! Wait for me! Monsieur!
Ah, Monsieur Blowitz. It's an honor. The Times is sending their best man.
You got that right. I thought you'd pinch. Just like last time, 3 months ago.
Come, please.
Thank you.
Thus, a risky journey begins, as the Orient Express must use the tracks of two arch-enemies, Germany and France. and up until then, trains were mainly used to transport troops. Nagelmackers, however, wants to take passengers from Paris to Constantinople, across all European borders, for the first time in history. Abu notes,
After Nagelmackers' first attempt with 3-axle cars had gone wrong, I was merely expecting a kind of larger, dusty ambulance, uncomfortable and full of soot.
Nagelmackers can't be sure that all his partners will adhere to their contracts.
The Orient Express required no less than 10 different contracts. The train started in Paris, so Nagelmackers had to negotiate a contract with the French Eastern Railway Company, with the Imperial Railway for Alsace-Lorraine, with the Royal House of Württemberg, with the Bavarians, with Austro-Hungary, then with the Romanians. And that was certainly a masterstroke, since nothing like it had ever been done before.
On the first day of the journey, Edmond Abu notes critically,
During my travels up until now, all the cars had been cramped and were jerking about so hard that I could hardly sleep. The air on the trains was bad, the heating broken, the food mediocre, the toilet dirty. Why, of all people, should this young Belgian do better?
Nuremberg. In the world's oldest railway museum, historian Christina Bloch is particularly interested in the age in which Nagelmackers lived. The pride of the collection is the S26, a steam locomotive which, from 1907 onwards, pulled the Orient Express.
In Europe at that time, you travelled longer distances by a horse-drawn carriage, which was not very comfortable. It went over very bumpy roads, through mud and slush. Horses had to be changed again and again.
Travelling was an ordeal. To get from Paris to Vienna took a man on horseback about 14 days.
Nagelmackers wasn't just thinking of how to get people from A to B. He wanted the journey to be as comfortable as possible.
A lateral thinker. Even as a teenager, he was considered maladjusted. Born 1845 in Liège. Growing up in the small Chateau Nagelmackers. The course for his professional future was set. His father owned the oldest Belgian private bank. Young Georges should join its staff. Yet the 19-year-old would rather go to university to study civil engineering, much to the displeasure of his family. And that wasn't all.
The Orient Express only exists because, in the beginning, there was a love story. Georges Nagelmackers was working in the bank. One day he told his father that he wanted to marry his older cousin. In a Catholic family, marriage to a cousin is unthinkable. So his father decided to put an end to that relationship. He sent his son off to the United States of America.
In the Wild West, Nagelmackers discovers the Pullman sleeping cars. In 1869, American rail tracks had met at Promontory Point, linking the east and the west coast. Competing railway companies were building ever new lines. Now passengers needed only 1 week from the Pacific to the Atlantic Ocean. Nagelmackers is fascinated and disgusted at the same time. The Pullman cars have neither toilets nor spaces for dining.
In America, Pullman cars were designed quite differently. You have to think of it a little bit as a class excursion. You have one big car as a dormitory with in longitudinal direction wooden banks, which can't have been very comfortable. Privacy was simply not as important in Europe at the time.
So in America, travelling meant roughing it. Nagelmackers strived for more in Europe. Back in Liège at 23, he outlines a business plan. He intends to have a new type of sleeping car built according to his ideas and attach it to the express trains of other railway companies. He publishes a paper called Project for the Introduction of the Sleeping Car on the Tracks of Europe. Yet in Europe, all there was at the time was small, two-axle cars. They offered seats for just 6 passengers. The seats could be turned into improvised beds, an arrangement less than comfortable. So there's a lot of skepticism. Edmond About, too, harbours some definite doubts.
I assume that at night the passengers will lie in bunk beds, on top of each other, 2 to 4 persons. Most men will snore terribly, and possibly worse things will happen. I feel no inclination to go in there.
Back then, there were no beds for the staff in standard sleeping cars. Over long distances, that's a problem. Nagelmackers' team consists of 6 employees. Where are they going to spend the nights?
Bonne nuit.
Yet Nagelmackers is innovative. He has a second floor installed for his employees.
There was a lot of attention to detail. I used to be a sleeping car attendant myself, and I can tell how well the cars were thought out. From the beds, which could be put in different positions, to the coat hangers that had rubber studs so they didn't clatter against the wall at night. So, one thing is certain, this business model was highly cost-intensive.
Nagelmackers' parents lend their son some money, but it's definitely not enough. He can merely start his company from it, the International Sleeping Car Company. No one imagined that 30 years later, it will be the most successful transport company in the world. At the age of barely 25, the young entrepreneur negotiates with Belgian companies, as well as with German and French banks. He's trying to make a difference with his idea of a European network of sleeping cars. Yet the financiers show considerable reserve.
Unfortunately, there were opposing opinions. Since I was a banker myself, I can understand why most people thought this plan was far too risky. The investments were enormous, and somebody had to bring up all this money. So the banks rejected it.
Nagelmackers succeeds in persuading the Belgian king, Leopold II, to become a shareholder. Yet His Majesty never pays for his shares. However, his recommendations help the young entrepreneur to conclude contracts with railway administrations and to put his dream on the tracks. With sleeping cars in line with his own ideas, on October 22, 1872, they are used for the first time. To start with, on the Ostend-Cologne route, then from Ostend to Berlin, and finally, between Paris and Vienna. Crossing borders in sleeping cars is a first, and there is the ever-present danger of being mugged.
No need for that, monsieur. But have you... Ah. And you?
It's even loaded. And I know how to use it, too.
I hope you shoot better than you write.
As you can see, my dear Abu, I'm still alive.
So guns seem more important than tickets. The route from Vienna onwards is considered particularly dangerous. Historian Roman Gruger retraces Nagelmackers' steps among more than 240 kilometers of shelves full of records in this huge repository of the Austrian state. The way Nagelmackers negotiated his contracts has remained the basis of negotiations between railway administrations in international transport, even today.
The great thing about the contracts we found is this list of railway companies that he brought together under one roof to run his trains. First his wagons, then his trains. What intrigues me most about the contract on the Orient Express is how everything is laid down. The maximum weight of the train on each section, the appearance of the cars, the details of the menu. All this was precisely worked out. Nagelmackers' enterprise was strategically planned from departure to arrival.
The Austrian State Archives in Vienna have succeeded in preserving documents up to 150 years old. The files show the extent of distrust with which railroad officials were viewing the project.
The first contracts were limited to 3 years. Only later on did they run for 10. Yet Nagelmackers' partners were always extremely hesitant.
Having built the first sleeping cars, the visionary has yet another idea. Although there were makeshift provisions on board, things were to become more professional. Nagelmackers has a kitchen installed, plus rooms for smokers and non-smokers. It's the first proper dining car in Europe. For the 1883 inaugural trip, he develops his rolling restaurant even further.
The logistics in the kitchen were of course highly complex because the space was so limited. All personnel had to know exactly what they were doing and how to coordinate their speed. In principle, it was like the tango.
Heat is provided by wood and coal.
The three-burner stove was called le piano, the piano. And on this piano, the chef celebrated the meals. Nagelmackers always tried to have the best cooks, only the best were allowed to work there. The same applied to the service personnel. Polished, friendly, polite, perfect. That was the Nagelmackers' touch.
Fresh vegetables, wines from Bordeaux, fresh fruit. Nagelmackers has the menus adapted to the countries of transit. Fresh ingredients are taken on board at every station.
Merci. Merci.
These meals were so excellent that often guests would reserve a table just to dine, and then leave the train again at the next suitable station.
To your health, Monsieur Abou.
The maiden voyage is for invited guests only. The Times reporter, Henri de Blowitz, writes about the cook.
None of us had seen him before. His apron shows the traces of that glorious battle he's been fighting for the last 24 hours, and won triumphantly.
His colleague Abou is amazed about the quality of the arrangements for the night.
As soon as you go to bed, a discreet ghostly hand in the compartment extinguishes the light until you are enveloped in darkness and gently rocked to sleep.
In 1872, Nagelmackers invests his last money in even more comfortable sleeping cars. He places a huge order with an Austrian company of wagon makers in Vienna. The factory hall where Nagelmackers' cars were built still exists, and they still manufacture axles and bogies in here.
The standards for sleeping cars were redefined at that time, and much of this is due to Nagelmackers. With the classic suspension on two-axle cars, each axle was directly connected to the bodywork of the car. So any unevenness on the rails was directly transmitted to the body of the car.
The precise interaction of wheels and axles is a main prerequisite for quiet running and comfort. However, in 1883, there are even more attractions concerning the comfort of passengers.
The only disadvantage of Nagelmackers' toilet is, in there, you feel as happy as a pig in a blanket. You just stay so long that the other passengers can barely control their need. And after each visit, a servant comes in and cleans up.
The deposits, however, drop down onto the rails. In 1872, Nagelmackers presents his new sleeping cars at the biggest PR event of the time, the 1873 World Fair. They're a resounding success.
Vienna was the ideal place to advertise for railways, as it was the railway turntable of the 19th century. From Vienna you could go in all directions, to the Balkans, to Constantinople, but also to the east and to the north, to Berlin, and west to Paris. The public at the World Fair came from all over the world and had a look at the cars, which were really unique for the time and offered a degree of comfort that barely existed anywhere else.
In Vienna, extraordinary apparitions show up. They come to break the rigidity of men's conversations.
On the second day of the journey, ladies board for the first time. An exception, since travelling is considered dangerous and therefore a man's business. The Austrian railway director, however, entrusts Nagelmackers with his wife, Mrs. von Scala, and her younger sister. To the man from the Times, the event is worth a note.
Your loved ones should never accompany you to the station for goodbyes. Because the elegantly laid table, the smell of the food, and the silver champagne lid draw all the attention of the passengers to the dining car and chase away the sadness of those leaving in a hurry.
With new wagons and the success of the World Exhibition in 1873, Nagelmackers is able to conclude contracts with 9 railway companies from 5 European countries. However, there are still difficulties in his way.
The German Empire was a collection of individual states, and each had its own national railway and separate railway administration. He had to negotiate with all of them and try to reconcile them.
The financiers, in particular, increasingly doubt Nagelmackers' business model. The use of third-party locomotives and rail tracks cost a lot of money. Nagelmackers is left with just a sleeping car supplement, or 20% of the first-class fare. He is financially ruined.
He fought again and again. He then tried a sideways approach. To reach his goal, he first targeted smaller providers, spending lavishly on presents, while hoping that they'd be door openers to the big provider.
In the middle of bankruptcy,
Thank you.
Nagelmackers receives a visitor.
So then, Colonel Mann, bonjour.
How are you, my friend?
I'm fine. Please.
The American railway car builder and outfitter of the US Army presents his new sleeping car. He'd like to do business with Nagelmackers.
My latest model. 3 compartments with 4 beds each.
Are there any toilets?
2, with hot water and a new heating system. Each compartment will be individually supplied.
How much will a car cost?
Excellent quality has its price, of course.
Nagelmackers' wife is worried when she learns about her husband's predicament.
How much then?
Although Colonel Mann's cars have only 3 axles, they are comfortably equipped with single and double sleeping compartments, a well-functioning heating system, and a wine bar with air conditioning. Rail travel in the 19th century is a challenge, although there is heating in the third class as well. Nevertheless, the passengers often freeze bitterly.
You can't imagine how cold it was, because the cars were not really insulated. They were all made of wood. After some time, there was at least the possibility of putting coal-fired furnaces in the third class, which were heated in the car. That meant it was somewhat warmer, but in winter, temperatures couldn't be raised above 10 or 11 degrees Celsius.
I'm glad we finally agreed upon that.
Well, that should be settled then.
The Colonel's sleeping cars with their new heating system impress Nagelmackers. Yet, since he doesn't have enough money, the American puts the squeeze on him and demands shares in the company.
Thank you very much.
As part of the contract, Nagelmackers has to hand over the management. The company is renamed Man Boudoir Sleeping Carriages. Yet, in his direct, gruff way, the Colonel has put the sleeping car company back on track. In 1875, numerous lines begin operating across Europe and to St. Petersburg, far in the east. It seems as if Nagelmackers and Man are the perfect match. On the third day of the maiden voyage, Henri de Blowitz notes,
"After Budapest, everything changes. The way people dress, the appearance of the cities, the proportions of the landscape. The gates of the Orient are opening before our eyes."
Budapest, the Hungarian capital, is a railway hub. This is where they repair cars and change locomotives. And Budapest is still home to an extraordinary collection of historical vehicles. Among them, this steam engine. For Orient Express connoisseur Peter Flug, it holds a special attraction. The 220194 was a technical masterpiece, able to pull the heavy cars of the Orient Express. In the huge engine shed, Peter Flug searches for historical evidence. For many years, the former banker took time out to drive as part-time sleeping car conductor on the Orient Express.
A sleeping car conductor back then was a jack of all trades. Host, diplomat, stoker, room service, bodyguard, manager of a small hotel with all the trimmings.
For decades, Flug has been researching the story of Nagelmackers and his sleeping car company. He's considered an authority on everything connected with the train. He knows that there is a unique treasure in the museum: the last railworthy carriage from the early years of the Orient Express. The car is emblazoned with the coat of arms of Nagelmackers' company, inspired by the lions of the Belgian crown and in honor of the king.
These teak wagons radiate an atmosphere that is indescribable. If you look at this car, you're immersed in a bygone world.
Yet it's also a world where business is tough, as Nagelmackers and his partner are to find out in 1875.
Dear business partners, on behalf of Man Sleeping Carriages, let me tell you that while we understand your concerns to regulate...
We don't understand a bloody thing. The prices in the dining car are of no concern to the railroad companies whatsoever. That's our business. It's enough that they dictate our fares. Who do they think they are? This is crazy!
Man and Nagelmackers are like fire and ice. The American is hard-hitting and impatient, the Belgian diplomatic and persistent.
Okay.
As they set off, it turned out that Alton Man was wanted as a con man in the United States. He was also a heavy drinker.
I'm sure we'll be able to meet in person at the agreed time and find a solution regarding the...
No, we won't!
It's all right.
Eventually, Nagelmackers manages to secure a loan to buy out his rogue partner. In his wife, Marguerite Mermet, Nagelmackers has an ally who backs him. As a result, he signs 22 new contracts with railway companies. 53 sleeping cars are now operating between the major European cities, each of which with between 6 and 20 passengers per night. Obviously, Nagelmackers has developed a way of convincing people.
I was at the Congress of Berlin. I have interviewed almost all eminent European politicians. Otto von Bismarck, the kings of Spain and Romania, even the Pope. But Nagelmackers is a mystery to me. How does he manage to inspire enthusiasm for his train among politicians from so many different nations, all of whom are full of fear and of mutual distrust? How does he convince all these different railway administrations, or manage to overcome all the borders?
Nagelmackers is not only able to convince people, he's also a marketing talent. His cleverly devised posters managed to draw attention to his company.
The poster was the advertising medium par excellence at the time. They were the largest coloured elements in the public space, so if you wanted to draw attention, you had to put up posters everywhere. They were highly elaborate, containing a lot of information. They projected wanderlust. You could see how it looked in Turkey, what Spain was like. They were luring you to faraway places.
However, they also draw some unwelcome attention. Countless times, the Orient Express will be held up. Bandits derail the train and take hostages. There are robberies and thefts. The fear of attack is already present on the maiden voyage. Abu notes,
Suddenly, to our surprise, the small gypsy band played like the blazes.
Of course, it's Nagelmackers himself who has hired the men. The musical hold-up is a feint. The inaugural trip is supposed to become an unforgettable experience, with special thrills for his passengers, a well-staged drama for the newspapers.
Of course, this is exactly in keeping with the spirit of the times. Nagelmackers tries to put together a well-rounded concept.
The journey is intended to be a PR coup, which will resonate as a memorable event among the opinion makers. And indeed, Times correspondent Blowitz notes about his fellow journalist,
I have never seen my colleague Abu so pleased.
But in the spring of 1883, Nagelmackers comes under enormous pressure. He's working on his dream project, the train Express d'Orient. Everywhere, there are posters advertising the event. But a decisive element is still missing. Nagelmackers had ordered new 4-axle cars that have not yet been completed. Nervously, he waits for the message on which everything depends. A disaster. Nagelmackers realizes, with old 3-axle cars, he doesn't stand a chance. The whole project would misfire. Vienna. In the Technical Museum stands the only originally preserved 3-axle car from that era. And it makes clear why Nagelmackers insisted on a 4-axle vehicle, a grey Imperial Royal sleeping car. Empress Elizabeth of Austria used it from 1873 onwards. A comfortable sofa, carpets, fine fabrics. Gas lighting and heating turned the car into a hotel on rails. However, the Empress has complaints when she takes her sleeping car for a summer vacation.
Empress Elizabeth travelled a lot and used this car quite often. And sometimes she was anything but satisfied. Mostly because there was this constant squeaking and jerking. But that is a common feature of the 2- or 3-axle car and the suspension with leaf springs.
On a bend, 2-axle cars will jerk about, while 4-axle cars will glide and adapt to the radius. Today, almost all trains are equipped with 4 axles and bogies, as Georges Nagelmackers envisioned it.
The bogies brought a definite improvement, simply because, as you can see for yourself, if there is a bump at this position of the axle, its force will be distributed through the length of the bogie and thus be dampened at the support of the car to almost half the effects. So the bogies opened up the possibility of driving at higher speeds because they increased smoothness and stability while the car was running.
The first Orient Express, with its 4 axles and bogies, is incredibly fast for its time, reaching up to 100 kilometers per hour. Other fast trains of the era do not even manage half that speed.
Nagelmackers' cars roll so smoothly that I can shave at 80 kilometers an hour. Without bleeding. Almost.
However, Nagelmackers' comfortable wagons weigh up to 55 tons each. Thus, he needs more powerful locomotives. Near Vienna, in the world's most extensive railway museum, there are more than 400 vehicles in an area of 145,000 square meters. On a track length of 1.2 kilometers, there's gem after gem. Between Vienna and Budapest, the Orient Express is pulled by the 310-23. The 138-ton locomotive brings almost 1,600 horsepower onto the rails and reaches up to 100 kilometers per hour.
The special feature of the 310-23 is that its construction constitutes the high point of the locomotive designs of the Austro-Hungarian State Railway. It's characterized by its very large driving wheels with a diameter of 2.14 meters, which also lend it great elegance. Being a showpiece, it was used widely, and since it was also very fast, it was the natural choice to pull luxury trains, such as the Orient Express.
Matthias Lupecki has been fascinated by the Orient Express ever since. In search of these extraordinary wagons, Matthias Lupecki and his museum colleagues have searched station after station for historically significant wagons. Thus, they were able to salvage this teak wagon of the Orient Express. Restoring it to its former glory would be a dream for Lupecki.
Among other things, I succeeded in finding a floor plan of our car on a scale of 1 to 1. So the layout of rooms can be determined exactly, as well as the dimensions of the compartments. You also get an idea of the overall construction, and in combination with old photographs of these cars, you can reconstruct what they look like. The next step was to get these cars into the museum, knowing that in later years it will be possible to restore them to their original condition.
Day 3 of the maiden voyage. In deepest Hungary, the Orient Express is an exotic appearance. Around here, trains are far from commonplace. The train is approaching Bucharest. In his diary, Abu notes,
"Today, there was not a single train inside for 5 hours. The Orient Express is ahead of its time, especially out here in the east."
All of a sudden, just before reaching Bucharest, the Orient Express has to stop. A bearing has overheated. It's impossible to go on.
Hey, you! Hey, what's the problem?
Nagelmackers is unable to communicate with the Bulgarian driver. It will be understandable if the passengers were upset. Yet the resourceful Nagelmackers has the situation in hand.
Excursion, very special.
Thanks to his excellent contacts with the Romanian King Carol, he's able to arrange a trip to a nearby castle.
I have never seen a castle like this before. Wood, marble, glass, interwoven and intertwined. Fabulous, ingenious, imaginative. In between, towers that scratch the sky like swords.
The king is an avid reformer, and the railway is a favorite of his. So he's massively expanding the network.
Today, politicians like to put themselves in the limelight as promoters of digitalization. Back then, it was the railway and technical progress in general. They built mountain railways, tunnels, bridges, and so on. And international railway lines offered an excellent opportunity to prove yourself as a modern, enlightened ruler.
King Carol, by the way, is not the only royal who dearly loves a railway. Once, near Bucharest, a group of horsemen appears unexpectedly next to the train. At first, Nagelmackers suspects a robbery, as it happens quite often in the area. The real reason for the sudden stop is a surprise, even for Nagelmackers, who regularly travels along. But then, he recognizes the man. It's none other than King Ferdinand of Bulgaria.
Your Majesty, only 40 kilometers per hour are permitted. Please. The bends are much too tight. That's dangerous.
Even if he has no license, the king thinks himself a born driver.
Your Majesty, please! Your Majesty, the other way! Slow down! Now! Your Majesty! Throttle back! Your Majesty, we have some French champagne in the dining car chosen by me personally. May I invite you for a glass?
A train that attracts kings and brings the peoples of Europe closer together. is probably the most important achievement of Nagelmackers.
Nagelmackers had set his aim so high that it was actually unattainable. In other words, it was constantly necessary for him to strive towards his goal, knowing that he might never get there, since there is no absolute perfection where people are involved.
Nagelmackers tries to achieve it anyway. He writes instructions so that every employee will behave perfectly. Every action and every detail is thought of.
Nagelmackers' attention to detail can be seen in the fact that even objects which are mere matters of utility for us were thoroughly designed. There were plans for everything, including the stepladder. A ladder is something completely banal, yet this one is most cleverly constructed, and due to its folding mechanism, it's very filigree and intricately designed. It's a work of art, if you will.
Nagelmackers commissions the best designers and tableware manufacturers of his time. In his cars, only the most select items of arts and crafts will be used. Most of them custom-made according to his own ideas and specifications.
They even had watch holders where you have a little hook at the top and a round part below where the travellers could put their watches. Even subtle and tiny things like that were thought of. To me, it's fascinating to see how people back then took everything into account, from beginning to end.
During the maiden voyage, Nagelmackers personally takes care of every detail. At no time should his passengers feel ill at ease. When he notices that in the deepest east of Europe, some of the French passengers feel a bit homesick, his cook provides a remedy. Singing the Marseillaise creates a feeling of togetherness and French spirit. By simple means like this, Nagelmackers succeeds in making his passengers feel comfortable.
His overall concept was each passenger should feel at home from the moment he boarded the train until the end of the journey.
Despite all his efforts, Nagelmackers is unable to make it to Constantinople in one go. On the last section, passengers must switch to a simple local train and then onto a ship. Many of the distinguished passengers aren't too enthusiastic about the prospect of having to dispense with their comfort. Nagelmackers orders his cook to take along the best bottles of his wine, to offer the passengers at least a touch of savoir-vivre during the last few kilometers of the journey, which will last a total of 81 hours and 40 minutes. After 15 hours, the Espero of the Austro-Hungarian Lloyd sails into the Bosporus and then into the Golden Horn. At dawn, the passengers reach Constantinople, today's Istanbul. Under the silhouette of the Hagia Sophia, the Europeans cross the Galata Bridge, a sight they've never seen before.
200 years before the Orient Express first departed, Austrians and Ottomans were still enemies. Now Austrians could go to Constantinople and see the Ottomans there. How do they live? What do they eat? What does it look like in the Hagia Sophia? Do they really all wear turbans? Even if the Ottoman Empire was forced out of Europe, maybe the Orient Express has done a little bit to foster better understanding of Oriental culture.
6 years later, in the summer of 1889, the Orient Express goes all the way through to Constantinople, ending at Siakechi station. The Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, Abdul Hamid II, had commissioned the German architect August Jachmund to design and build a railway station adequate to the splendor of the Orient Express. Even today, the station manager resides in an office dating back from the early days of the Orient Express. Maybe Nagelmackers was even the inventor of touristic events, as he has his guests welcomed by a show of Sufi dervishes. The passengers of the Orient Express are impressed by the dancers and their stunning performance. Today, the station houses an Orient Express museum with numerous exhibits from the past. The director of this exhibition is the descendant of two passionate railwaymen.
To us, the last stop of the Orient Express, the Sekirchi station, is a door to the west. For Europeans, it's the beginning of the east. In 1888, when the railway line finally connected Turkey to Europe, the Orient Express could go directly from Paris to Istanbul. This increased the number of passengers, yet there weren't enough hotels in Istanbul to accommodate them. Either they found no rooms at all, or not the desired comfort. So Nagelmackers got the idea of opening a hotel himself.
Around 1890, no hotel in Constantinople had running water or electricity, until Nagelmackers opens the Pera Palace. It's one of the few big railway hotels of the 19th century that still exists. It's the first house with a library, a restaurant, electricity and running hot water. It even has an extraordinary elevator. It's the second oldest electrically driven elevator in Europe, after that of the Eiffel Tower. In room 411, Agatha Christie writes her famous crime novel, Murder on the Orient Express. Georges Nagelmackers' train not only inspired Agatha Christie, but also Graham Greene and many others. In Europe, and soon in Hollywood too, the most famous train in the world serves as an impressive backdrop. In numerous movies, it's a place full of criminal energy, as if the killers were included in the fare. In fact, there wasn't a single murder on the Orient Express. Edmond About closes his travel diary with a new insight.
I was wrong. Travel is no longer an ordeal. Here, you travel in 17.5-meter long palaces, each of them steam-heated, well-lit and ventilated. And the seating is as comfortable as in a posh hotel in Paris.
In the following years, Nagelmackers builds further luxury hotels at attractive destinations in Lisbon, Monte Carlo, Cairo, and other metropolises. The railway pioneer is expanding his network. Around 1900, passengers can board in London, Brussels, Paris, Prague, or Trieste, travelling from capital to capital or to the Orient. In 1900, at the World Fair in Paris, Nagelmackers promotes a connection to the other end of the world and succeeds in putting the Trans-Siberian Railway on its tracks. His company develops into an empire that sends trains to St. Petersburg, Vladivostok, Beijing, and North Africa. In 1900, the company employs 6,250 people. About 1,000 sleeping cars carry more than 560,000 passengers per year. Nagelmackers has connected Europe and Asia with a working transport network.
It's something very positive to establish communication among people. In those days, it seemed difficult, even insurmountable, and needed spirits like Nagelmackers.
Businessmen, artists, politicians and diplomats travel with the Orient Express. Theodor Herzl, the founder of political Zionism, uses the train countless times for his shuttle diplomacy, heading for Palestine, where he'll meet with the German Kaiser, or to negotiate with the emissaries of the Ottoman Empire, of which Palestine is a part. Herzl fights for the realization of a Jewish state. During the next decades, the train often has to change its route. It's an indication of the respective overall political climate and the goodwill of politicians. In 1919, the Simplon Orient Express rolls for the first time. It runs via Basel through the Simplon Tunnel. In the Treaty of Versailles, the victorious powers of World War I had decided that the vanquished states were to be barred from the route. A year earlier, a car of the company had been the stage of an historical event. Although wagon number 2419D never served with the Orient Express proper, it was part of its carpool. In a clearing near the town of Compiègne in the north of France, in November 1918, the armistice between the German Empire and the Entente is signed in this very car.
In 1940, after the campaign in France, the National Socialists, as a means of revenge, insisted that armistice negotiations took place in the same car. It's a historical irony, actually a bitter one, that of all things, a train that was a symbol for international understanding was made into a symbol of humiliation and hatred.
However, even this cannot harm the reputation of the Orient Express. It remains the legendary train of trains, set on the track by a pioneer in the history of transport.
He initiated something completely new in Europe. He accomplished the act of crossing borders without waging war.
Travel educates. Even Times correspondent Henri de Blowitz has come to accept that.
Everything I imagined has nothing to do with what I see. Everything is more beautiful, much more beautiful. Because human imagination cannot fathom infinite beauty. And those who read my report will see a fantasy Bosporus which has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with the real thing.
Whether Nagelmackers actually had a vision of a common Europe without borders can't be ascertained. What's certain, however, is that he wanted people to be able to travel comfortably around the world. With the Orient Express, he achieved what today seems more difficult than ever: a borderless link between Occident and Orient.